Welcome back to the Blue Saints podcast for episode 2. Thank you all so much for watching, tuning into episode 1 and all the feedback. I very much appreciate it. Episode 2 is going to be phenomenal. Today, we have Gregg Pemberton as a guest. He's the police union president out in Washington, D.C., and we're going to talk about a lot of issues that are impacting both the D.C. Police Department, our police department, how those things are connected, and things we can do to make our community safer. So enjoy. So just starting out, thanks. I appreciate you hooking up with us on the Blue Saints podcast. This is episode 2. To get the union boss in from DC is a big deal for me, so I'm excited about that. Thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Man.
So just
can
you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in your role, how long you've been on, your union, your police department, those types of things, and then we'll kind of dive into the subject matter.
My name is Gregg Pemberton. Currently the chairman of the DC Police Union. I represent about 3,000 police officers that work here. For the Metropolitan Police Department. We represent everybody sergeant and below in our union. So we have sergeants, detectives, investigators, and officers. This organization's been around for about 40 years. I think in 1981 is when it kind of came into its current condition. And so, we focus on collective bargaining. We have full collective bargaining rights out here, and obviously all the representational matters that come with that. Being in DC is a very unique beast. Anything inside the Beltway it's a very bizarre Twilight Zone world. It's not a state. It's a city that has a city council and a mayor, but Congress has the ultimate authority over the district, even though it's not exactly federal. So we're a municipal police department, and we do all of our negotiations basically with the city and deal on the legislative side with the city council. Like many other cities like you and your brothers in Minneapolis and Chicago and New York, for the past 5 years, we have been dealing with all of the same stuff, which is police reform and defunding the police and eliminating police officers and replacing police officers with all of these other goofy ideas. Hamstringing cops, exposing them to liabilities, administrative, civil, criminal, you name it. And so we've been through it all, and it's been a long ride, but I think we've done a pretty decent job navigating those waters, and I think everyone would agree we're starting to come out of that environment, and it's sort of what can we get back at this point? How can we gain some solid ground and some solid footing? And so that's kind of what our focus have been. We've recently got a new contract implemented. We've had 2 decent contracts. We had a 15% 3-year contract, and then this current one is a 13%. And we're actually going back to the table probably within the next few months. So hopefully we can get another decent increase now that we're competing with a lot of federal agencies. As you see, the Trump administration is beefing up ICE, Homeland Security, CBP, all these agencies. They're offering $50,000 hiring bonuses. So I think we're in a good position to go back and continue to get some wins. But yeah, it's been a wild ride, man. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to talk to you about it.
You mentioned a little bit about kind of post Floyd, where all these where things have gone in our profession, a lot in terms of police reform. I reform, the word kind of bothers me because it's basically the insinuation is there was a problem there in the first place with our profession. I truly don't think that there was. Obviously, there's departments in certain places that have issues within their culture, and there's certain cities that have very adversarial relationship with their police department. Those things are going to happen no matter what. But police reform really. I understand. I like to frame it as, police evolution. We're always evolving. Nobody's evolved like we have. I mean, there's not one other profession that wears body cameras regularly. Nobody is held to the same level as we are. And I'm sure, much like yourself, I welcome it. Bring on the accountability. We're doing the right things. We have highly trained professionals, hardworking cops. They care about the community. But part of all this, again, especially as it relates to the defund the police movement, which is why I asked you to come on the podcast, was there's all these alternatives now to policing, right? And we're looking at, in the term, I'm going to use air quotes, reimagining policing and these types of things. So ultimately, right. people people won't always frame it as defunding the police, but when we talk about violence interrupters and kind of how that's evolved in these large metropolitan areas, specifically post-Floyd. And again, in our community, we've had people dating way back, community groups and activists, and those in the faith community that have been helping us in the community forever. So it's not really that new for any of us probably to have those people involved with our police departments and helping us with community engagement and those things. But the violence interrupters is kind of a unique situation. You've got these organizations that are largely, a lot of times, nonprofits. They're getting state and federal money. It's taxpayer dollars, not free money. It doesn't just come out of thin air. This is taxpayer money, and they're getting these huge contracts. And so I know you've had some issues in DC, and I'm just going to dive into. I looked up the definition of a violence interrupter online, and this is what I came up with. And then I want you to kind of give us a picture of what's going on there and your experience with violence interrupters. But here's the definition I found. A violence interrupter is a trained individual, often a community member, and with personal experience in high-risk environments, who actively intervenes to de-escalate conflicts and prevent outbreaks of violence, particularly gun violence, in at-risk neighborhoods. So that's the definition I found for a violence interrupter. So tell me about how that's going in DC and your experience with violence interrupters in some of these groups.
Yeah, so violence interruption kind of showed up mainstream in 2020, and it was proposed as a way to completely replace policing. And as ridiculous as that sounds, I think sometimes we forget how preposterous some of the ideas were that came out in 2020. But one of the ones that we dealt with here was, well, we can just defund the police. We can just completely dissolve the Metropolitan Police Department, and we'll just replace them with violence interrupters, which what I understand them to be out here is these are ex-convicts. So these are convicted felons who have spent time in prison. They're now out of prison. They've completed their sentences. And then they're hired by these nonprofits, as you mentioned, as salaried employees. And again, those are tax dollars that they receive from the government. And they're paid to go out into these communities and convince people not to commit crimes by, enlightening them to their own life experiences. There is absolutely zero efficacy that is working. And frankly, there's absolutely no way to scientifically track that. And so one of the ways that they've been able to get away with this by, and I should say, I think they get about something like in the neighborhood of $20 million a year from the DC government. I read a report the other day that said since 2018, just one of the programs received over $100 million over that time frame. So this isn't chump change. And what they're doing is they're hiring people, and then they're asking those people to go out in the community and interact with people who could potentially go out and commit crimes. That is not something that we can measure. And I think that's the most frustrating part about this, is that this is just an ideology that exists. There is no scientific way to get to the bottom of it, to figure out whether it works or it doesn't work. And I think the most offensive part of it is that the way it was proposed and the way it continues to be proposed is as a replacement for policing. Because on paper, I could see that there's a potential for a program like this to have some kind of impact, but not in way to replace policing. I think the only way that you can do that is to supplement the policing that we know already exists. You have to be able to put handcuffs on people who've committed crimes and hold them accountable in the criminal justice system. You can't just expect people to go out and tell people, hey, look, it's a really bad idea for you to go out and commit more crimes. So what we've seen here is what appears to me to be just a complete grift. These people go in, they convince the city council that they're the answer to everything, that they're going to treat violence as some sort of community health problem, and that they'll go in and they'll convince people not to commit crimes, and crimes will go down and we won't need the police. And in doing so, they end up separating the district government through tens of millions of dollars every year of tax dollars where they fund these operations. And ultimately what we see on the street and what's reported in the media is that a number of these people end up being arrested for committing crimes themselves. We've had people that have been charged with murder. We've had people that have been charged with drug dealing operations. There was one person that was caught with 100 grams of fentanyl, people who've had search warrants served on their houses. They've one individual, his name was Breon Shuford. He was arrested because he was affiliated with a drug trafficking organization, trafficking fentanyl into the district. They did a search warrant on his house. They found thousands of dollars in cash, firearms, narcotics, you name it. He pleads guilty to the charges, and in his plea, in front of the judge, he says that he was receiving $48,000 a year as a violence interrupter, but that wasn't enough to make ends meet, which is why he turned to drug dealing and gang activity. There's no way to manage this system, and there's nothing in place to put any kind of guardrails on who is hired to do these jobs and what actual job they're doing when they get out into the community. And the third part, which I think is the hardest, is how do you prove that it's working? How do you prove that this is actually a successful operation? And my thought here is that, one of the issues we've been dealing with in DC is that it's become pretty clear that the Metropolitan Police Department has been manipulating their crime data for some time to convince people that crime is going down when it in fact has not. And we currently have the Department of Justice is investigating, the House Oversight Committee in Congress is investigating, and the Internal Affairs Division within our own department is investigating whether or not that happened. I believe it did. I believe that those investigations will reveal that that's what was happening. If a major metropolitan police department in the nation's capital can manipulate crime data, I'm pretty sure a nonprofit organization running a fly-by-night operation that is designed to go convince people not to commit crimes, that whatever data that they're putting forth to support their success is very easy to manipulate. And so I just have zero trust that that these programs have any level of efficacy whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think the huge issue is there's really no way to track or measure these things, right? There's nothing to qualify that these programs are definitely successful. And to your point of like accountability, I mean, who's keeping timesheets? What kind of training do these people have? We know a lot of them are convicted felons, which would prohibit them from ever being police officers in the state of Minnesota. Our post board, police officers standards and training, would prohibit most of these folks from ever being police officers. Yet they'll like to attach themselves to police departments or say they're a part of the police department or do whatever they do. But again, no training. I'm curious as to what a lot of these folks' background checks look like outside of whatever their convictions are and what's going on in their personal lives. But and then, where is all this money going? And the way that I see it is that's money that could be going to your police department. How many cops are you guys down right now?
We have an authorized strength of 4,000 sworn members. We currently have 3,180, so we have about 820 vacancies for the position of police officer, which is painful, very painful. Yeah. And budget-wise, are there many constraints on your budget right now? We were just asked to cut our budget by $1.5 million. We're down 60 to 70 cops right now. We've been down anywhere from 100 cops to 60 cops post-Floyd, which again is a smaller number than yours, but it still accounts for 12% of our workforce. And so we've had to backfill. The calls don't stop coming in. We're still required to provide the services. So we've had a lot of our overtime called into question. And so now guess what? We're going to have to cut some money from our budget, and the positions we're going to cut, and smartly, aren't sworn positions. They're going to be civilians, and a lot of them are these community engagement and outreach specialists. But what's really frustrating, you talked about some of the criminal activity some of these folks are involved in. Back on the 13th of October, 2 of these violence interrupters in Minneapolis were federally indicted on gun charges. They got into a gunfight after one of their shifts. So those are the types of things we're talking about. And what really brought this to mind is we had a member, I'm sorry, that was actually back in June. So that was June 6th. Those guys were federally indicted on the gun crimes for that shootout in Minneapolis. But on the 13th of December, we had a St. Paul Police Department civilian employee, a community engagement specialist assigned to our non-fatal shooting unit. He got charged with first-degree possession of narcotics. He had, I think, 10 plus pounds of meth delivered to his house, cocaine, some fentanyl, I think, and had a couple firearms there. So This guy was walking around our police department doing whatever he was doing, had access to Lord only knows what, was privy to all kinds of law enforcement only types of conversations and information. And what saddens me about it all is the joke's on us. This dude is a bad guy.
He's committing crimes. All the other bad guys knows they know he's a bad guy, and he's basically embedded himself in the police department, and he had access to all kinds of information, to include most likely sensitive investigations. So it saddens me because our cops are out there doing a great job. We don't go out and select these people. They show up and say, here, this person's going to be working with you. Turns out he's probably dealing dope, and he's got guns, and it's a black eye for the whole police department, and it to me, it's just an unnecessary kind of self-inflicted wound with some of these people. Now, I was told that he passed the background check. Now, I'm sure he did, and if it was our background check, it would have been thorough. But I don't know. It's a bummer for these cops that are out there doing the work, and sometimes we're actually forced to work with these folks that we don't know that much about, and it makes our whole police department look bad.
So, you mentioned background checks, and that let me tell you a story about that. We have a council member here named Trayon White. He represents Ward 8 here in the District of Columbia, and he's been indicted by the FBI for accepting bribes, and those bribes came from a gentleman that is the CEO of a nonprofit organization called Life Deeds Incorporated, which is a violence interruption nonprofit. And so this guy who's running this organization, he gets caught up by the FBI on I think, a PPP loan or some sort of financial scam that he's running. And so he gets caught by the FBI, he gets charged, and he ultimately pleads guilty to that. But part of his plea agreement is that he says that he can become a confidential human informant and capture Trayon White, the DC council member, accepting bribes. So they take him up on the offer, and they wire him up. They wire up his car. And he goes and meets with Trayon White multiple times and hands him envelopes full of cash. And the reason that he's giving him the cash is because his contracts with the city to support violence interruptions are being denied by the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. And Trayon White was at the time, he was the chairman of the committee that oversaw the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. And so this CEO of this nonprofit, he's giving Trayon White cash bribes to look the other way for his contracts. And he's also bribing a woman named Dana McDaniel, who's the deputy director of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. She's also been convicted of accepting bribes. But the interesting thing here that I think gets lost in a lot of the stories is the reason for the bribes was that his contracts were being denied because his violence interrupter employees could not pass the background checks. And he wanted both Trayon White and Dana McDaniel to look the other way on these background checks so that he could continue to get these contracts approved that are worth millions of dollars annually. And, the question that arises to me, and this is what I was thinking of when you were last speaking, is, these programs are designed to hire ex-convicts, convicted felons who have done time in prison. What kind of background check can you not pass if that's the type of employees that you're targeting? I mean, what's going on? Did they have active warrants? Did they have, sexual assault charges? Are they, on the sex offender registry? I don't know what the case is, but there must be something seriously wrong if your violence interrupters can't pass a background check, and that you have to then use cash bribes to a DC council member and the deputy director of this program to get these contracts approved. And, I think, we mentioned at the top of the show that this whole program and this ideology seems like a grift, and it is, and it can be. And that doesn't mean that there's not good people out there trying to help these communities, but this is something that is impossible to track, and it is impossible to monitor, and is impossible to put up guardrails for to make sure that people aren't abusing it. And so until those things can be established, my position here is that we shouldn't be investing in these. If private organizations want to do this, if they want to fund that privately, those people can do whatever they want. But local governments, state governments, the federal government should not be investing a dime in violence interruption until we can establish some kind of standards and guardrails and prove that there's any level of efficacy and be able to show scientifically that it works. So I agree with you. The background checks are a really big issue, because who are these folks that are taking these government dollars, and how do we know that they're doing what they say they're doing? And the questions are always going to arise when there's news story after news story. You mentioned the ones in Minneapolis. I mentioned a couple here in DC. I recently saw that there was some quote unquote peacekeepers in Chicago that had been arrested a number of times for violent crimes. How many times are we going to find out that somebody who was posing as a violence interrupter was actually just a criminal on the public dole? It's crazy, and it needs to stop.
So considering your experience with violence interrupters in DC and some of the experiences we've had here in St. Paul, and again, I'm not going to go down the road of there aren't some super valuable civilians in our community helping us out, because there are. We have some great partners in St. Paul that help us in the community. We have some awesome community engagement specialists that are doing a phenomenal job for us in those areas. But the one aspect of these violence interrupters is in my view, that is money that could go to our police budget. And when we're doing a really, really good job and we're down cops and we're asked by the city council and the mayor to cut money from our budget, to me, that's problematic. Our crime numbers, again, I think numbers nationwide, homicides are down, I think, but violent crime is pretty steady. Here, the last numbers we have, violent crime is actually up 1%, even though our homicides are down by just a ton. And so I'm sure there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't have all the data in front of me. Lord only knows why, but those are the numbers. They are what they are. And we largely tie violent crime to just the homicide number, and that's just one metric, as we know. When it comes to rapes, robberies, violent assaults, all those things, again, we're a little bit up, about 1% actually. And that's money we could be using to pay police officers to go out and combat those crimes. And we know it's tried and true. Police officers and squad cars, proven strategy. Really good experienced investigators out there working their butts off on these cases, proven strategy. Prosecutors that actually prosecute crimes, that's a proven strategy, which that's kind of nice too.
Absolutely.
If you in our particular situation, if we have a city and a county attorney that would be willing to aggressively prosecute a lot of this lower level stuff, and then again some of the more significant stuff where people get off with probation or just really minimal prison sentences, it just that doesn't work. But we know cops go out there and do the job and get the job done. So the money part of it, for me, is troubling, especially considering our pay. We've made some decent strides, but it seems like, as we work through every single contract, all these other suburban police departments are getting bigger contracts and making more money than we are. So money is always a challenge. So the money piece of it is really tough for us to accept that money going elsewhere. And we also have an Office of Neighborhood Safety. It's a separate department within the city that was developed, again, post-Floyd. And I can't point to their work and say it's good, bad, or indifferent, but I know that they lean on us heavily, and I feel like that should be potentially maybe a part of the police department that we oversee, and we kind of dictate those terms and how that's going to work and how they're going to interface with the police department and our investigations and some of those other aspects. But in your view, how do we fix this? If they're going to be violence interrupters, and you did mention this, that they should be privately funded, go ahead, go out in the community with your private funds and do whatever you got to do. If you're going to reduce crime, that's great. And we've had community volunteers out there, especially in our faith communities, forever out there on their own time. They care about their community. They're out talking with kids there. We're talking 10, 11 at night on light rail platforms and in other areas where there's likely to be some kind of a violent outbreak. And so we have people that do that. But if we are going to do it, again, one of the rubs that I have is the rules that pertain to being a police officer in the state of Minnesota are so stringent. Why wouldn't they be just as stringent for these violence interrupters that are out there, and sometimes in many cases are working alongside our police officers, the people, our members, the people we represent, and sometimes in sensitive law enforcement situations have access to sensitive information, have access to sensitive areas, are sometimes driving around in police vehicles. What do we do?
Yeah, that's the important question is how do we move forward? I think one of the biggest issues that we have to tackle, and really this kind of falls on violence interruption and the elected political officials that support this, is it has to stop being sold as a replacement to policing. It cannot work as a standalone entity. You have to have police officers that can go out into the community and address threats and address violence, address crimes that have been happened, put handcuffs on people who've committed crimes, get them into the criminal justice system. That has to be the baseline part of the criminal justice system. Now, if you want to add in this sort of public health approach where you have people that go out into these communities and they're trying to enlighten folks as to why a life of crime is the wrong choice and try to convince them not to go down those paths, I think there's a potential for a benefit there. But it has to work in conjunction with policing. And still here to this day in our city council, it's one or the other. We don't hear that these violence interrupters need to sort of mesh with the traditional law enforcement and kind of work together to find ways to resolve these issues. We don't hear that. And so I think that's the first part that needs to be approached is we need to drop this concept that violence interrupters are here to replace cops, first of all. Second of all, you talked about budgets. It's very important that we have enough money to fund the police department because there's always going to be demand, right? 911 calls require a police officer, require a police car and a police officer to respond there and handle that emergency, whatever it may be. And that's why police officers have so many tools and we have so much gear, is because you never know what you're going to be up against. And if a 911 call comes in and you get sent there, you need to have all of those tools. Violence interrupters are never going to be able to fill that role ever. That's not what they're there for. That's not what they're designed for. And so we have to have a baseline amount of money to cover the proper level of staffing that all of these departments need. And I think one thing that, and you mentioned this, and I think I mentioned it earlier, one of the main problems that came out of this defund the police movement was that there's a much smaller pool of candidates nationwide that are seeking to be police officers, right? Those kids that grew up wanting to be a police officer, that was their life's goal. There's fewer and fewer and fewer of them. And so now we're all competing for a much smaller pool of candidates, which is going to compel these jurisdictions, whether they like it or not, most of them don't like it, to increase those salaries so that they can be competitive. And you talked about this, how as soon as you get a contract in, guess what? Everybody around you gets their contracts in, and now you're back at the table doing the same thing. And there's going to be this fight for the next few years until we get to a place where we stabilize these numbers. But I think what all local jurisdictions, municipal jurisdictions like yours and mine, where we have city councils, where we have a mayor, what they all should be focused on is we need to figure out what that number is of the minimum number of police officers that we need, and we need to make sure that we can stay at that level so that we can respond to the demand that's out there. And now, if you want to talk about adding these things in, go ahead. My philosophy is these are nonprofit 501c3s. They can raise all the money they want. They can take all the tax deductible donations they want. Let them go out and do that in the private sector. And if they want to employ people to hang out in the community and talk to folks, great, go ahead and do it. That's wonderful. I do not think that they should be taking $20, $30, $40 million a year in taxpayer dollars that is going into God knows what and finding its way into people's pockets that are selling drugs, that are committing murders, that are selling firearms, that are involved with gang activity. That's where a lot of that money is going. Until we get to a place where the police departments in these major cities can stabilize from a staffing perspective, and we actually have the proper number of people to respond to the calls and handle the number of reports and incidents and investigate the crimes that have happened. The most important thing that we need to be doing is just having the proper number of cops that are out there. And then, once we can do that, if we want to start talking about adding in these different layers, whether those are nonprofits or those are non-police entities, then let's have those conversations. But let's have them in a way that allows them to mesh with traditional law enforcement. Because that's the only way that these things are going to work, is if we're all working together. We can't be fighting each other on these issues. We can't be, saying, oh, it's this or that. If it's going to work, it's going to be everything working together, and everybody's got to be on the same page.
And to your point, this is super important because as it relates to offering competitive wages and benefits, and this is where we're at in Minnesota. We're down 1,000 cops in Minnesota. In the next 5 years, I think there's another 2,000 or 2,500 set to retire. And to your point, it's hard to get people into this profession right now. So what we're dealing with here is we have a wages and benefit package, which starts out pretty competitive at the beginning of our contract, and then towards the end of the contract, not so much. But as we're trying to recruit people, and you look at every single suburb around St. Paul, and they're paying much more money, not just to start, but in terms of career earnings, if you were to look at that number, that's money that we're spending in other areas that we could take, we could put it on the table and say, hey, folks, you don't want to go to that suburb and be a cop there, not because it's a bad place. I'm not putting the knock on any of our suburban partners. We have great partnerships with all those folks, but we have to be competitive financially because there is some stiff competition for cops right now. And we have a lot of cops in terms of lateral transfers that will go from one department to another based solely on pay. cops will do that. They'll say, boy, I can make $10,000-$15,000 more a year for the same hours of work. It's closer to home, whatever the facts might be. But we're losing a lot of potential candidates, good candidates to other departments, because we're not offering as much money as some other places. And yeah, there's more to it, money, but let's be honest, money is important. And a field this competitive right now with so few cops, you have to be at the top of the scale if you want to remain competitive. And I would just love to know what we could accomplish at full staffing. We haven't been at a full staffing level for so long. I don't even know. It was pre-2020 when we had a full complement of police officers in St. Paul. And like I said, since then we've been down 10 to 15% for 5 years. And if we could get back up to a full staffing level. And again, that's just, and we kind of play this game where I'm from, whereas it's budgeted staff, not authorized strength. So it's floated between 617 cops to 620 cops, which, to be quite frank, I'm not as concerned with that number right now until we can get up close to it. And then we'll start talking, maybe it should be 640, maybe it should be 650. I don't know what the per capita number should be for a number of cops in St. Paul, considering we have, a population of about 330,000. But I would love to get to that point, and then let's see where things go. How are we doing? What's the criminal activity look like? What are the solvability rates looking like? And how do things feel in St. Paul when we're able to do all the things the community is asking us to do? And in fact, right now, Minneapolis, I think, is down 300 or 400 cops. It's like 40% of their workforce, 30 to 40%.
Yeah.
And
That's
they're
great.
talking about civilianizing, hiring back civilian investigators and all kinds of these crazy things, which you and I both know don't work. But when we're talking about trying to replace cops, it can't be done. And I'm sure they've probably tried in your department. They have embedded social workers or those types of things. But you talk about an Office of Community Safety or Neighborhood Safety and those things and how they could help police departments. You and I both know we need to show up and make things safe before we can do anything else at these scenes. We go there, we make it safe. Now then things can be a little more challenging for us because maybe it wasn't a crime. Maybe we're dealing with a mental health crisis or a homeless person or some kind of a domestic related incident or placing children, whatever it might be, where we could actually use some help from civilians, but we're tied up on these things for hours and hours while we're short staffed because there's just nobody else to deal with those types of issues. I could see a better fit for civilians in those areas where we'd be able to pass people off quicker, but that's another topic. But point being, yeah, and in Minnesota specifically, I don't know if you pay much attention. So I don't have a lot of faith in our legislature and local government as it relates to spending money. We're up to there's $1 billion feeding our future fraud scam that went on here during COVID, and these nonprofits again were popping up and supposed to be feeding kids that weren't in school at the time, and all these fabricated numbers. Well, that turned out to be over $1 billion in fraud. Well, then we started. Our legislators, thank goodness, started to put some pressure on the Department of Human Services, and now I think we're at about $2 billion as it relates to some housing fraud, healthcare and Medicaid fraud, feeding our future fraud. So now we're at about probably over $2 billion in the state of Minnesota, this fraud. And again, that amount of waste is just unbelievable to me. And the fact that this all went unchecked for years, we're talking 5 years, this stuff went unchecked, billions and billions of dollars down the tubes.
Listen, you talked earlier about accountability, and we welcome accountability. We welcome the body cameras. If officers are out here and they're doing something wrong, we understand that there's a price that has to be paid. You've got to do this job by the books. And the fact is that the dollars that could be spent on police officers, that's trackable. We know what those guardrails are. We know what the accountability is. We know what the efficacy is. We know what it looks like when we have police officers out in the field. And as you mentioned, there's a demonstrable amount of success that we can track to the number of police officers that are out in these neighborhoods. When you talk about violence interruption, when you talk about social workers, when you talk about behavioral health, there's no way to measure that. And all it does is just suck up millions and millions of tax dollars every year, and then it just disappears. And it's ripe for fraud and abuse, and there's really no way to track its success rate. And so until we can get guardrails on those aspects of the system, we should be making sure that we're fully funding the police department. And something else you mentioned too is it's not only just about hiring, but it's attrition. And I'm sure you have a similar problem. You mentioned it that we do, which is that a lot of officers are looking for greener pastures. They get 5 or 6 years into a job like this, and they're looking for other jobs. They're looking for other counties. They're looking to go back to cities that they might have grown up in. And what they're finding is they can make similar pay with similar benefits and have less stress than working in a municipal environment. And so what we have to do is we've got to focus on hiring and attrition. And the way that you do that is either through policy, which I know that police departments and legislatures are very reluctant to do, is to make life easier for police officers, or you can deal with the pay side and you can be as competitive as possible on the pay and the benefits. And I think that's where they have to go, because what the goal here should be is that minimum staffing level, make sure we have the proper number of police officers to police these jurisdictions. And from there, we'll know what needs to be added or what needs to be amended.
I want to go back to these officers that are looking for greener pastures. And again, this speaks to municipalities making long-term commitments to their cops. Think about all the effort, all the training, all the work that went into these cops. You talk about cops in that 7 to 15 year range, where they still have 10, 15 years left in their career, sometimes 20. These folks are at the prime of their career. They've just figured it out. They're solid officers. They're solid investigators. They know how to go out and be street cops and work at a really high level. They know how to run investigations at a high level and get convictions. So when we lose those people, who do we replace them with generally? We replace them with a rookie, and there's nothing against the rookies, but it takes a while to get up to speed in this profession. There's no substitute for an experienced cop. There just isn't one. And how do you get that experience? You go out, you push the squad, you answer calls for service, and you work hard, and then you gain some experience. And then after you decide, hey, maybe I want to go inside, then you go work investigations for a few years, and then you get dialed in on the investigative side of things. You put it all together. And you have some kick-ass cops. And when we lose those people, that's a huge detriment to our department. Those are people we need, people we're relying on to get these investigations pushed over the finish line, and we're losing those people. And again, we need the financial commitment from these municipalities long term if we're gonna fix this. And we know this. We know that these communities, our communities, they need us. And we do care about our communities. As a union, I care deeply. As a union president, rather, I care deeply about the city of St. Paul. I was born and bred here. I raised my kids here. I love St. Paul. All right, my parents still live in St. Paul. I have a lot of family in St. Paul. This truly is home. Will always be home to me. And a lot of my colleagues are in the same boat. Folks that, of course, aren't even from here. They love the city. They love working here. They love the community. And fortunately for us, we've always enjoyed a really positive relationship with the community, and that's kind of in stark contrast to what's gone on the other side of the river over Minneapolis, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm not casting stones. They have a lot of super good cops over there, and they're dealing with some things that I just couldn't even imagine. It's truly like another world, policing on the other side of the river. But here, again, we just have always had a different relationship with the community, and something that in our culture is just really positive as it relates to community relations. So I think it's important, especially for the electeds, to know that the city can't function without us. We can function without violence interrupters. We can function without a lot of these other things. They cannot function without a police force and a fully staffed police force, as far as I'm concerned. I would love to see what we could accomplish if we were fully staffed. I think we could do some really amazing things and really meet a lot more of the community's expectations. And they've never been higher. And to that end, the community wants us out there. They want uniformed police officers amongst them, being a part of the community, communicating with the community, getting out of the squad cars. This isn't anything new. This is stuff when we first started out, we talked about when we were going to school to be cops, is community policing and all these things. It's not a new concept. Yeah. And we've been doing a great job at it in St. Paul for a long time. So we know one thing for certain, is that none of our communities will thrive without a strong, positive police presence. It's just impossible. We have to have that. And to the communities that did actually try and defund their police departments, it didn't work. They were huge fails, huge rises in crime. People didn't feel safe, and all these cities were worse off for those types of initiatives. And in fact, in Minneapolis, it was on their ballot to abolish the Minneapolis Police Department, to abolish it. And fortunately, it went down 55 to 45 percentage-wise. 55% voted not to abolish the police department, but 45% of the people that voted actually voted to abolish their police department. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. That's crazy. Yeah. And, you talked about that brain drain, right? Is that you've got guys that have 5, 10, 15 years on, and they know exactly how to do this job. They've developed relationships in the neighborhood, relationships in the department, relationships in the community, and they can close cases and they can get things done. And when you lose that, it's not as easy as just saying, oh, here's a brand new recruit for you. That's years worth of work to get that person to a place where they're actually functioning in a way that's as effective as the person that left. And that's something that we have to keep in mind here, is that if legislatures and city leadership in these jurisdictions are not thinking about that, how do we retain this knowledge base of these people with these 5 and 10 years on, who've been out in this community? They know every street, they know every alley, they know all the community leaders, they know who the bad guys are, they know who the not bad guys are, who maybe don't need to get arrested, they just need to be talked to. That it's a long way to develop that employee. And it's much easier to hold on to that employee for the rest of their career than it is to replace them with a brand new recruit officer. And the way that we do that is either by changing policy and making it more inviting to be a police officer, which is not likely to happen, or we make sure that the wages and benefits outpace everybody else. And so those are the things that I think we're going to focus on until we can find a way out of this mess that started 5 years ago.
Yeah, they're 100% intertwined. And in addition to that, we need support from these city councils and these mayors and these elected. We need their support. We're talking about this community engagement specialist from our department that got arrested on the dope charges recently. If that were a licensed police officer, and by the way, we hold ourselves to a high standard, as we should. We need to hold ourselves to the highest standard. But if in fact that was a licensed peace officer, our department and our union, we'd be being beaten over the head with this case. All right. But because it wasn't, one news cycle, it hasn't really been in the media since. When it comes time for any court appearances, there'll be a story on it. If there's a trial, there'll be a story on it. If he's convicted, there'll be a story on it. But when one of those incidents happens, and it's a police officer, a licensed peace officer, or one of your members, it just never goes away. And every time you have a meeting, people will throw those things in your face. And to me, that lends itself to the support we need. There's going to be outlier situations. We can't look into every one of our members' hearts and know that what they're up to every minute of every day. Most of them, 99% of them, wonderful people out there trying to do good. But sometimes people do slip through and mistakes are made. But when those things happen, what tends to happen, at least at my experience here in the Twin Cities, is our entire department gets painted with a broad brush when a cop gets in trouble somehow, some way, and not so much with these folks in these other positions. Certainly, violence interrupters, as we've already talked about, a lot of them are convicted felons and have rap sheets miles long. We had one name, and I'm not going to mention the name on this podcast, but a name was floated of somebody that we should hire for one of those positions, and it was laughable considering this person's history with our police department and their conviction status. Again, somebody with multiple convictions. And there are people that actually want us to hire this person to work for our police department. And that should be a non-starter. Those shouldn't even be conversations we're having, but we're having to have those conversations. And I think there needs to be oversight. I think the money needs to go to police departments, and the focus truly should be on getting us up to those full staffing levels. And that comes through, again, competitive contracts and support. We need support.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think the answer here, we've been over it a couple times here, but I think, you and I and other labor leaders around the country are focused on the same thing. We've got to get out of this mess, all the way out of this, all of this nonsense that started in 2020. And the only way to do that is going to be to entice more people to apply for this job and more people to stay in this job throughout their career. I would love to see them change the policies and roll back everything that they've done over the past 5 years, but that's a moving a mountain. So, what we're going to focus on now is benefits and wages and compensation and overtime. And those are the things we need to go after to make sure that we're actively recruiting and holding on to these personnel. And hopefully in the next few years, that we're going to start to see a real change in these staffing levels and in these crime rates. And I think more and more people out in the community are starting to understand that, starting to understand, hey, look, if we have the right number of cops, That's how we fight crime. And that's probably our strongest tool out there, is convincing these citizens that we actually are the answer and not all of these other kooky fringe ideas.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I truly appreciate and value your opinion, and I value and appreciate your work as a police officer, and specifically a labor leader and out there running your union. That's a huge job, a lot of responsibility. You take a lot of heat. Your phone's on 24/7. Which, as you know, might be the most stressful aspect of this job, because the phone never stops. Yeah. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day to help me out and have this discussion. But hey, best of luck to you out there. Keep nailing those good contracts and working on behalf of the cops. I know they appreciate it. Your hard work and your effort, and just keep grinding. And if there's everything we can do here in St. Paul, or you're ever up here, make sure you hit me up and we'll connect. And I'll do the same when I'm in DC.
Thank Mark. Thanks so much for having me. I love this show. I love the format. I just want to say thanks to all your members who are out there working so hard. Try to keep these communities safe, because this really is a joint effort. All the things we talked about on this podcast, if we're all doing the same thing, if we're all rowing the same direction, even if you're 2,000 miles away, we're going to continue to get gains, continue to get benefits, and eventually there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and this stuff's going to start to look better. So I really appreciate it. I think everything you're doing out there is great, and if you or your members are ever out in DC, shoot me a line, and we'll see if we can't get together and give you guys a tour of the city.
Awesome. Likewise. Keep up the great work, my friend. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Got it.
Yep.
See ya.
Bye-bye.